Thanks for tuning in. I'm your host, Andy Zopp, and this is the fall season premiere of Chicago Newsroom 2.0. In this week's roundtable segment, we'll hold a DNC post-mortem, unpack the escalating tensions between the mayor, the Chicago Teachers Union, and the Chicago Public Schools CEO. We'll also lift the hood on a city budget that leaves a lot to be desired, most notably the dollars needed to balance it. But first, I'll sit one-on-one with Women Employed CEO Cherita Ellens to discuss what matters most to women in the lead-up to a historic presidential election. We'll get started on the other side of a short break. Stay with us.
On the next edition of The Compassionate Competitor, I'll sit in conversation with former University of Illinois football player turned coach, Chris James.
It might seem like you're down, right? All you gotta do is keep battling.
Join the conversation on CAN TV Cable Channel 19 or stream live on cantv.org or on the new CAN TV Plus app. Elevated conversation and storytelling. Experience the power of community television.
In less than 60 days, we'll know if America has elected its first woman and first woman of color to serve as President of the United States. In the first presidential election since the overturn of Roe v. Wade and affirmative action, women, the largest voting bloc in the country, will play a key role in deciding the direction this country takes over the next 4 years and beyond. Joining me today to discuss what's at stake in the upcoming election, as well as the critical work her organization does day in and day out in support of women, the CEO of Women Employed, Cherita Ellens. Welcome to the newsroom, Cherita. Nice to see you. Thank you so much for coming. Now, I'm very familiar with the work of your organization, but many in my audience may not be. So why don't you tell us a little bit about Women Employed and what you do?
Would love to. So we are, as you know, a 50-year-old advocacy organization that really focuses on building equity and economic power for women, primarily women that are in the workforce. And we do that through policy change. We do that by advancing education and training opportunities, as well as ensuring that we have fair and inclusive workplaces. And so you've seen that play out a lot in recent laws that we have been responsible for passing, such as the Paid Leave for All Act in Illinois, the elimination of the sub-minimum wage in Chicago, and then the salary transparency bill that will go into effect in January, among other things.
Yeah, let's talk a little bit about, well, that was a mouthful. Let's talk a little bit about some of those bills, because I think people are kind of surprised that we needed those laws. So let's first talk about the Paid Leave for All Act.
So the Paid Leave for All Act in the state of Illinois, once it passed, it gave an additional 1.5 million Illinois workers access to paid time off. These individuals did not have access to one paid day off. And for people like you and me, we take that for granted, right? We have plenty of sick time, we have plenty of PTO time, but there are actual workers out here that could not take a sick day without losing pay. And so this bill was one of the most progressive bills across the country because it wasn't just for sick time, it's for any reason at all. And then in Chicago, if you're a resident in Chicago, because we passed paid sick days in 2017, we added an additional 5 days after the Paid Leave for All Act passed for the state. So Chicago residents and Chicago workers have both 5 paid sick days as well as 5 paid days off that can be used for any reason.
Wow, it's incredible, first of all, to realize that, for people to realize that so many people didn't have, now they do, didn't have access to paid time off, which means your kid gets sick, you get sick, your car breaks down, or you just need a mental health day. None of that can happen.
Exactly.
Does that apply to only full-time or part-time workers too?
It's based off of how many hours you work. So you can accrue for every 40 hours, and it adds up for a day for every 40 hours you work.
Every 40 hours. Terrific.
Yes.
Wow. Okay. You also mentioned salary transparency. So what is that, and why is that important?
Oh my goodness. So a few years ago, we actually passed the no salary history ban. And this is why elections matter, because it took us 3 years to pass that particular bill. We passed it twice, both in the House and the Senate in the state of Illinois. And our governor at the time, wasn't Pritzker, it was Rauner, he vetoed it.
Wow.
Twice. And so we finally got it passed in 2019.
And what did that bill do?
So the no salary history ban makes it illegal for employers to ask you about your previous salary in a job interview process. So they can't base your current salary on what you made in the past. They can't base hiring decisions based off of what you earned in the past. And as you know, for women, that's important because we are been historically underpaid. And so if you take one underpaid salary and you go into the next one, you're still underpaid, even if you get an increase.
Right.
So base my salary on what the current job pays, not on what you think I deserve, based off of what I was paid in the past.
It's hard to believe, by the way, that someone would veto that. Like,
I know,
wow,
twice.
Right? Like, wow, that's not a good thing.
It's not a good thing.
We want to make sure that employers can underpay women, right? So
twice. So that went into effect in 2019. And so the recent salary transparency bill that was passed just this past year will go into effect this January 2025. And that mandates all employers, I think if you have 12 employees or more, that you have to list, this is not rocket science, but you have to list the salary range, a good faith salary range, as well as the basic benefits that comes along with the compensation on all job postings. Wow. So it helps with negotiation, right? Because women typically don't negotiate their salaries when they go through the door. And Black women are penalized when we negotiate our salaries coming in. So this kind of takes some of that off, where you know what the fair market value for that particular job is. And if it's not in your range, you don't even have to waste your time to interview for it. But if it is within your range, you don't undersell yourself because you're trying to get the job.
Right. Again, not penalizing employers, not just requiring people to provide full information so that people can have a fair chance to argue for themselves.
Exactly.
Right? So hard to believe that that's something that would be controversial.
And it was controversial because we passed it a year ago, and we had to give employers a year ramp time to get ready to start putting their salary ranges on job postings.
Right. Well, because for smaller firms, maybe not a huge problem, but a lot of big companies probably hadn't been doing it, which is incredible. So it's a good news. But this issue of pay equity still is a huge issue for women, right?
Absolutely.
It's incredible to believe, but the numbers are still that women, particularly women of color, are still significantly underpaid compared to majority women and majority men.
Absolutely. And part of that is, there are so many different levers to that. So it isn't just about the pay, because even if you correct it for equal pay for equal work, which we should be doing, but we're still having that conversation, that's not corrected. You still have occupational segregation, right? Too many women of color are being driven into positions and roles in careers that don't pay living wages, that pay traditionally low salaries, but also the careers that we choose, because we choose to go into care, we choose to go into healthcare, we choose to go into teaching, we choose to go into social work, and those professions are not paid what they should be being paid.
Right. Certainly, I say that about all of those. The care, those roles are so critical. So why do we underpay them?
Exactly.
Right? If we have someone caring for someone we care about, we want to make sure that person's being fairly compensated. Let's before this time always goes too fast for me. So before we move on, I started my remarks talking about the fact that this is a really important election for women. First of all, we have a candidate, a woman of color as a candidate for the Democratic on the as a Democratic candidate, and second of all, the issues that are critically important: women's right to choose, how health care generally. How do you feel like you're and the women that you work with are advocating or are positioning themselves to engage in this election?
So this election, it doesn't matter what your political standing is. It is so critical that we are involved and that we understand where our candidates fall on the issue. Like you mentioned, you have the women's right to choose. One of the other things that we don't talk enough about is to ensure that we have a sound infrastructure for our care economy. And we don't talk about care as infrastructure, but it is. If we don't have the proper child care, if we don't have caregiving supports, if we aren't paying these people in the professions enough, the infrastructure itself crumbles. And we saw that during the pandemic. And so we have to make sure that we are putting candidates in seats that care about our care infrastructure and making sure that it is solid enough to support American workers.
Wow, it's such a really important point. And also to remember that while the presidential race is really important, it's all the races that really matter. And as I said, this time always goes really super fast, and we could be here for quite a bit more.
Absolutely.
And I always love seeing you and talking to you. Thank you for the incredibly important work that you're doing on behalf of women. We'll be right back with this week's Roundtable.
I'm Darius Hillman, inviting you to join me for the series premiere of Chicago Noir, the news magazine that highlights and showcases the African American experience in the Windy City. Tune in each month on CAN-TV Cable Channel 19 or stream live on cantv.org or on the CAN-TV Plus app. Elevated conversation and storytelling. Experience the power of community television.
After mounting the All Eyes on Us DNC, the city must now deal with the sobering reality of a 2025 budget deficit of nearly $1 billion. There's also the $230 million deficit that remains in the current budget to contend with. Will the mayor have to go back on his campaign promise not to raise property taxes in order to mend the country-mile gaps in the budgets? Speaking of budget shortfalls, financial woes weigh heavy on Chicago Public Schools CEO Pedro Martinez, who is feeling the heat from the Chicago Teachers Union and Mayor Brandon Johnson, both seemingly wanting Martinez to exit stage left. And with less than 60 days before the country elects its next president, can Chicago officially take a victory lap on the heels of a major incident-free convention? To help us take a closer look at it all, I'm joined by Newsroom regulars Hugo Balta, the host of Chicago Politics, and Dr. Dominica McBride, founder and CEO of the Become Center. Dominica, Hugo, so happy to have you both back. Let's get into it. Let's talk about, first of all, the DNC, right? Went from snooze to must-have ticket, and all of us before the DNC were we gonna make it through? So, how do you think we did?
I think we A plus. There's just so much that goes into planning such an event. It's such a rare opportunity. The last time that the convention was here was in the 90s with the second term of former President Bill Clinton. I think in regards to security, planning, looking at local businesses, yes, there were hiccups along the way, including protesters, but overall, I think the city showed up, showed a good face, and executed well.
Dominica, how about you?
I agree. For it to go so smoothly is definitely a win, right? There are people that were planning to come from other states that at the last minute chose not to because they were scared. They were scared of what could happen. They were scared of the security risks, but that it was safe overall, right? Minus the COVID, surge after that, but safe overall, relatively, that's a big success. One of the areas for lessons learned, though, is how could we have uplifted the community more, in the process. So I think there's a missed opportunity with really uplifting Chicago communities in the process, but a win overall for it being here, it going smoothly, and being safe.
Yeah. Although I think they did, I think you're totally right. And there were, there was that balance between the security, right, and the fencing that put some constraints on small businesses around around the United Center. But I do know that they used a lot of local minority-owned businesses at the DNC who did all kinds of things, everything from setting up the stage to doing the events and the flowers, and so a wide variety of things, food, security. And so I think there was real opportunity for the small business community. I think really helped. And personally, I was also amazed at the weather. How many people did you go, oh yeah, the weather, it's like this all the time in August, right? It was incredible. So, the mayor got a big victory lap. Do you think, how much of a uplift do you think the mayor got from the DNC?
Oh, that was a big win. Yeah. I mean, for them to put so much into, even like you said, the thoughtfulness around who they contracted with to help to facilitate what happened, to bringing everybody on board, to like the economic bump that some companies got, from the DNC being here. I think that it could definitely go on his record as a success during his administration.
And now he's dealing with a huge budget deficit. So what are you hearing about the budget deficit and the potential impacts, Dominica, from the communities that you work with?
Yeah, the budget, a big part of this is like the lack of community integration and leadership within the process of it. There's a lot of scapegoating going on around the budget, not only like the root causes of the gap, but then also what and how can we move forward from here? Like there's an opportunity for us to deepen into community creativity as well as expertise, as well as who's at the table right now and really coming together to dig into the root causes and dig into the potential solutions for true win-win scenarios, but making sure that we really keep the community members, especially those most marginalized in our city, at the heart of this conversation.
Right.
And that's key to success. We were talking about this before we started the interview. And the secret sauce is the community. These are people that are often talked about, but not spoken to, let alone listened to. And a lot of the solutions come from thought leaders in the community and the community itself. So for them to have a seat at the table, to have a platform to be heard, is going to be crucial in any initiative that talks about where do we go from here.
They announced a hiring freeze, which is going to have a huge impact on the city. Are there other things that you're hearing that you think could work for the city in terms of addressing this deficit?
Look, I think everything's on the table. You mentioned in the beginning of this conversation property taxes, right, which Mayor Brandon Johnson campaigned on to get elected. Of late, not a refusal, but it sort of hasn't been answered. If that's still on the table, of course it's on the table. Just the fact that they're not responding automatically says that it's on the table. And as it should be, it is the responsible thing to do. At this moment, everything should be on the table. And then when the decisions are made, including perhaps property taxes, to be transparent in regards to the process of where you got in what you're proposing to make close that gap.
Right. The other thing they're talking about is the hotel tax and the hotel levy. But of course, lots of people are concerned that that's going to impact tourism and dollars and the work. I don't know, Hugo, what do you think?
I think whether it's that idea or others, it's sure. Let's talk about what was on the table before and didn't make it, but not just to regurgitate previous ideas. I think too often, figuratively speaking, thought leaders, elected officials don't do enough of stepping away and looking around at responses to solving these issues. This is not unique to Chicago. So what are best practices and lessons learned elsewhere, comparable cities that we can learn from? It's trying to force a square peg into a circle mentality that just keeps us going around in circles and debating about things that have already been proposed. So step away, let's look at what's working elsewhere, and then propose something similar, nuances that make sense for Chicago. There needs to be spent more of that I think, from our elected officials.
And there's also like not to mention just the country or the cities within the country, but there's also cities internationally that we can be pulling from that think very differently than we typically do in the United States. That could also work and be innovative as well as applicable in this situation.
Yes, agreed.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. Well, it really does. It does require thinking outside the box, looking to other examples. It will also require the mayor to connect with the city council. Hopefully that, I know, what do you think? Is that something that he can really step up and do? He's had some bumps along the road with the city council.
I definitely think like connection and relationships are the way to go, in making progress in any situation, especially in politics. But not only connect with the city council and deepen into those relationships, but connect with the community. I mean, he's very good at connecting with community in general, as far as he's charismatic, he's charming, he's, knows how to move people, right? But deepen into the connections in some of our most hard-hit neighborhoods around the economic situation and what they can unearth and what we can unearth together. And there's all kinds of different like facilitation and co-creative technologies and methodologies that we can use to bring people together to think innovatively about this and to end with actual actionable ideas and steps forward. So work with skilled facilitators in this, as well as people who are skilled organizers in bringing these different stakeholders together.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And it's about intention versus impact, right? He's a change agent, but you want to be a progressive change agent over time, less destructive. People are automatically resist change, but you can't be a bull in a china shop type of change agent like we saw with Mayor Lori Lightfoot. So I think coalition building is very important, very difficult with 50 members in the council, but in that regard, you need to be patient and you need to play the long ball and not just look for a quick hit.
Yeah, very wise.
So, we're talking about collaboration and a little less, maybe like instead of name blaming, really thinking about how we can cooperate. And so maybe we could lose a little bit of that when it comes to Chicago Public Schools. So the the CEO, Pedro Martinez, has been under attack, and there was a headline, I think, on one of the news shows that said, could his days be numbered? And Stacey Davis Gates, who's not only the CTU president but a close advisor to the mayor, wrote a op-ed where she challenged, said basically he's responsible for the financial health of the school district and it's not going well, which I don't know is 100% fair to him, but we can talk about that in a minute. At the same time, Joe Ferguson, who's the head of the Civic Federation and the former Inspector General, said basically Martinez is trying to manage the budget and the CTU is trying to drive the schools off a financial cliff. So is there a right or a wrong here? Who wants to go first?
Look, I'll tell you, they're all right? It's a my right
Good
approach.
answer. Very diplomatic.
Because it's so complicated, and you have the school board also, and then we've got an election coming up in November, right? And that's going to throw in another wrench. I think it goes back to what you say, and that is to make sure that you bring in the community, because the decisions that are being made ultimately are affecting the community. So you have to be mindful in what you're bringing to the table, but you also have to be purposeful in integrating the community into the discussion and debate to get an answer. Right now, we've got different groups, the union, the school board, the mayor, they're all pulling for their side and not spending enough time listening to how does this impact the community? What does the community need? And what ideas can come from the community?
Absolutely. Very well said.
Yeah, I think also, and this really goes to what you're saying about really, both of you, about engaging the community, is I think a lot of people don't really understand the puts and takes, right? So, when the CTU goes, oh my God, they're not spending enough money on teachers and they don't care. But the Civic Federation says, well, they're trying to balance the budget. I don't know are there ideas around how we can better inform the community about what the challenges are?
Yeah, that's one thing that I think is often missing when we're talking about engaging community and like co-creating something and co-creating solutions, is that piece around education, right? We just go to like, what do you think about this? Or what do you think we should do? Instead of stop and saying like, what do we collectively understand right now? And going into how we're seeing things, what assumptions we're bringing, and what is actually happening, like laying this system, this very complicated, complex system, like laying it out for us all to really grapple with, and being patient, like you said, over time for us to sit with this, for us to understand it together, and then to go deep into really working together to co-create the solutions and next steps.
Yeah.
And being transparent about it. I think when you're transparent, you're informing, educating, and empowering the community, and stop the fear mongering. A lot of the negotiations that are happening in the media are largely based on the sky's falling in order to garner support. You got to stop that noise and really focus on being transparent and laying it out. I think the more people understand, the more the public, the better it's going to be for them to, when they have to swallow that pill, and they will, it'll be easier.
And humility has to drive this, especially from the people who are within the system and the inner workings, like to take a humble stance, to really listen and to work with the community in moving forward together.
Yeah. Well, as usual, we have just talked our way right through all of our time. So Hugo, Dominica, thank you so much for your insights on these important topics. And so we'll see where we go with CPS and if the new elected school board will help with more transparency. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
I'll be right back with my final thoughts on the other side of this short break. Stay with us.
Hi, I'm Bianca Cotton. Join me Mondays at 7 p.m. for Behind the Confident Smile as I sit in conversation with incredible, dynamic, and complex Chicagoans who peel back the layers, living lessons, the joy, and the pain behind their confident smiles. You can watch on CanTV 19, cantv.org, and CanTV Plus app.
As I mentioned earlier, in less than 60 days, we will elect the 47th President of the United States. No matter your politics or whether you consider yourself moderate, conservative, or liberal, the upcoming election is absolutely not about partisanship. The election is without question about what future do you want for our nation. This election could not pose clearer choices. As I have previously said on the show, I encourage you to learn about Project 2025 and the dramatic restructuring of the federal government that the plan proposes. Listen to what the candidates and their campaigns are saying. You will hear two very different views about the rights of women, people of color, and the LGBTQ community. You will hear two very different views about addressing gun violence and protecting our children. You will hear two very different views about ensuring access to health care and about protecting workers and creating jobs. Most importantly, you will hear two very different views about democracy, about the power of the president and the right to use that office to punish political enemies. I have heard some people say that this is just another election and no matter who wins, nothing will really change. To those people I say and have said, you are simply wrong. Please take the time to listen, read, and to see the stark differences presented by these two candidates. If you do, you will see, as have so many of us have, this election is consequential and will matter in significant ways. We have the right to vote, a right that many who came before, including my grandparents, did not have. And we have a clear choice. This election, more than any other in recent memory, requires you to listen, to get informed, and to exercise that right to vote, and most importantly, to choose wisely. Thank you for joining me today. Until next time, be well and well informed.